The tray hit the floor before Min-Jun could stop it. Pastries scattered across the tile. The bakery went silent. Every head turned. And there, standing behind the glass counter with flour dusted across her apron, was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with deep brown skin, natural hair pinned back with a yellow clip, and a smile that froze Min-Jun Lee where he stood. Not because she was smiling at him, because that smile was his. He knew it the way a man knows his own reflection. The slight pull on the left side. The 2 deep dimples that formed like parentheses around the lips. The way her eyes crinkled at the outer corners and her chin lifted just slightly when she was amused. He had seen that face his entire life. In mirrors, in old photographs, in his mother's living room. He had never seen it on a stranger. And he had never, not once in 37 years, seen it on a child who looked nothing like him in every other way, and yet somehow looked exactly like him in every way that mattered. The girl tilted her head. "Mom says everyone has a twin somewhere," she said, completely unbothered, and turned back to arranging the croissants. The bakery slowly returned to its quiet morning rhythm. Cups clinked. Someone laughed softly near the window. But Min-Jun stood completely still, heart hammering, staring at the back of a child he had never met, trying to understand what he had just seen. He left without ordering anything. Outside, the morning air of Cedarville hit him cold and sharp. He had come back to this small Ohio town for one reason: his cousin Daniel's wedding, a 3-day affair that his entire extended Korean family had flown in for. 15 years away had made the town feel like a photograph of a place he used to know. The streets were familiar but distant. The faces he passed were ones he half recognized but couldn't place. He had been walking early that morning to clear his head, jet-lagged and restless, and the bakery had simply been the first warm light he saw. He never expected to walk out shaking. He told himself he was imagining things. Weddings made people emotional. He was tired. The lighting in the bakery was warm and strange. He had probably misread the whole thing, but he kept seeing her face. At the rehearsal dinner that evening, surrounded by cousins and aunts and the loud, joyful chaos of his family, Min-Jun sat quietly at the edge of the room. His cousin Daniel noticed first. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Daniel said, dropping into the seat beside him and passing him a glass of water. Min-Jun stared at the tablecloth. "Maybe I have." Daniel laughed and moved on. But Min-Jun didn't. He went back to the bakery the next morning. She was there again. This time, when she saw him walk in, her whole face lit up. Not the polite smile of a child who recognizes a customer. Something warmer, more personal, like she had been expecting him. "You came back," she said. "I did," Min-Jun said, and he didn't even know why. She told him her name was Amara. She said it the way children say things, directly, without ceremony, as if the world owed her no explanation and she owed the world none either. She was helping her mother in the bakery before school. She liked the cinnamon rolls best. She hated tomatoes. She had been drawing pictures of buildings since she was 4 because she wanted to be an architect when she grew up. Min-Jun sat down at the small table nearest the counter and forgot, for a moment, why any of this was strange. Then Amara leaned her elbow on the counter and rested her chin in her left hand, and Min-Jun's breath caught. Because that was exactly what he did when he was thinking. Left hand. Chin. The elbow pressed at a slight inward angle. He had done it since he was a child. His mother used to scold him for it at the dinner table. He watched Amara tap her fingers against the countertop in a quick, unconscious rhythm: index, middle, ring, pinky, then back again, over and over. A nervous habit. His nervous habit. One he had never once thought to connect to anyone else. A woman at the corner table was watching them. Min-Jun noticed her the way you notice something wrong in a room before you can name what it is. She was staring with an expression that didn't fit the pleasant morning atmosphere of the bakery. Not curious, not friendly, something closer to afraid. She was black, mid-30s, with locks pulled back and an apron around her waist. She had come through the back door a few minutes earlier. She had not introduced herself. But when Amara looked up and said, "Mom, this is the man from yesterday," the woman's whole body changed. She straightened. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved from Amara to Min-Jun and back again with a kind of careful, measured caution that Min-Jun recognized as something practiced. This was not the reaction of a woman meeting a stranger. This was the reaction of a woman who had been waiting for a particular stranger to arrive. "I'm Min-Jun," he said, extending his hand. "I'm only in town for the week." "My cousin's wedding." "Grace," she said. Her handshake was brief and firm. "We should get you going to school, baby." Amara groaned and slid off the counter stool. She grabbed her backpack from behind the register, then paused at the door. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked Min-Jun. He looked at Grace. Grace was looking at the floor. "Sure," he said. Grace said nothing. But when he stepped out onto the sidewalk and glanced back through the window, she was still standing exactly where he had left her, watching him walk away. Not with irritation, not with suspicion, with something that looked very much like dread. If you're finding this story as gripping as we do, smash that like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. Min-Jun spent that afternoon with his family, smiling at the right moments and saying the right things while a quiet, persistent storm moved through the back of his mind. He tried logic. He tried distance. He reminded himself that resemblance between strangers happened all the time. Genetics were strange. Coincidences existed, but Amara wasn't just similar to him. She was a copy of him in ways that went beyond features. The mannerisms, the habits, the left-handedness, the finger tapping. The way she tilted her head when she thought. These were not inherited from a stranger. These were not coincidence. These were him. He began asking quiet questions around town. Old classmates who still lived in Cedarville, former neighbors, anyone who remembered him from before he left at 22. He was looking for a connection to Grace, a history, an overlap he had forgotten. Some forgotten night, some relationship he had buried, nothing came up. He had never met Grace. He was almost certain of it. And Grace was too young to have known him before he left. The timelines didn't fit. He returned to the bakery for 3 consecutive mornings. Each time, Amara greeted him like they had known each other for years. She showed him her sketchbook. Pages of buildings, towers with curved edges, bridges with unusual supports, houses that sat in trees. Min-Jun stared at the pages and felt the ground shifting under him. He had kept a sketchbook just like this when he was 8. Same kinds of buildings. Same fascination with structures that broke the rules. He looked up at Grace over the top of the sketchbook. She was watching him with the same guarded expression. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. When Amara had moved to the other end of the bakery to help a customer, Grace said nothing. She folded a dish towel slowly. "Is Amara my daughter?" The words landed in the air between them like something dropped from a height. Grace's answer came immediately. "No," clipped, final, too fast. "Grace, she's not your daughter." She turned away. "You should probably stop coming by." But Min-Jun had spent 15 years building things from scratch in a city that didn't know his name. He knew how to be patient. He knew how to keep digging when the walls went up. He contacted an attorney friend in Cleveland. He pulled old records. He followed threads. And 2 days before the wedding, sitting in his cousin's guest bedroom at 2 in the morning, he found something. It was buried in an old email account he barely used anymore. A letter he had received and never fully processed, years earlier from a bone marrow registry. He had donated in his late 20s after a campaign at his office. The letter had informed him, in careful, anonymous language, that his donation had been used, that the recipient had survived. He had read it once, felt a brief, quiet pride, and moved on with his life. He read it again now with completely different eyes. He started pulling records. It took 2 days and cost him 3 nights of sleep. But eventually, through a medical advocate who helped donors access limited outcome information, the shape of a story began to emerge. The recipient had been a woman in Ohio, early 30s, critical illness. His bone marrow had saved her life. He already knew without needing confirmation who she was. He went to the bakery before it opened. He knocked on the side door. Grace opened it in her street clothes, no apron, looking like she hadn't slept. She took one look at his face and stepped back. "You know," she said. "You were sick," he said. She closed her eyes. "You were dying," he said. "And I donated bone marrow through a registry and I didn't even know your name." And then somehow he stopped. He pressed his hands together. "But that's not the whole story, is it?" Grace sat down at the small table in the back of the kitchen. She was quiet for a long time. Amara was still asleep upstairs. The bakery was dark except for the light above the prep counter. "I was 29, Grace said finally. "Illness came out of nowhere. They said I had months." She looked at her hands. "The donor match was rare. They found one. I didn't know who it was. You don't get to know who it is." She exhaled slowly. 2 years later, I wanted to have a child. I was in remission. The doctors said it was possible. I went to clinic." She stopped. "Grace, there was an error." Her voice barely held. "They used the wrong sample. They told me months later, after I was already pregnant. There had been a mix-up." "The sample they used," she looked up at him for the first time. "It was yours." Kitchen was completely silent. Min-Jun sat down because his legs stopped working. I was told the donor had been notified through the clinic's legal process, Grace said. They said all involved parties had been informed. I assumed that included you. I assumed you knew and had chosen not to reach out. I built my whole life around that assumption. Her voice broke. And then you walked into my bakery. Min-Jun stared at the wall. His mind was moving very slowly through something very large. I was never notified, he said. Grace covered her mouth. I never received anything from that clinic, he said. Not one word. She was crying now, quietly, with the controlled grief of a woman who had been holding something alone for a very long time. And Min-Jun, sitting in the back of a bakery in the town he had left 15 years ago, began to understand that someone had made sure he never knew. He went to his mother's house that afternoon. She was in the kitchen when he arrived. She saw his face in the doorway and went very still, the way animals go still when they understand something is coming. Clinic contacted you, Min-Jun said. He was not yelling. His voice was very flat and very careful. When Amara was born, they notified all involved parties. You were listed as my emergency contact on the original donation forms. His mother said nothing. She set down the wooden spoon she was holding. You knew I had a daughter, he said. For 8 years, you knew and you said nothing. Jun, 8 years. She turned to face him, her eyes were wet. I was protecting you, protecting the family. A lawsuit, a scandal, your career was just, she's my daughter. The words came out like something rupturing. She is 8 years old and she has been alive for 8 years and I didn't know she existed because you decided. I was trying to protect you. From what? His voice finally broke. From knowing I had a child, from knowing there was a person in the world who was mine. He pressed both hands against the counter. You don't protect someone by stealing 8 years from them. You don't protect someone by stealing 8 years from their child. His mother was sobbing. He had never seen her sob like this. Not at funerals, not at anything. She was folded over the kitchen counter with her whole body shaking. Sorry, she kept saying. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Min-Jun stood there for a long time. Then he walked out. The wedding was the next day. He went through it like a person moving underwater. He smiled for photographs. He danced when he was supposed to. He gave a toast that made his cousin laugh. And underneath all of it, he was somewhere else entirely, sitting in that bakery kitchen, watching the shape of 8 years rearrange itself around a child he had not known to love. Don't go anywhere. What happens next broke everyone who heard it. He stopped going to the bakery. He couldn't explain it to himself in any way that made sense, but the grief and the fury had fused into something that paralyzed him. He didn't know how to walk back in there. He didn't know what he was allowed to want. He didn't know how to be angry at Grace, who had done nothing wrong, and how to be angry at his mother, who had done everything wrong, and also how to be a father to a child who didn't know she needed one. So he did nothing. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a folded piece of paper arrived at his cousin's house, slipped under the front door. He almost didn't open it. Inside was a drawing. Crayon on notebook paper. 3 figures holding hands, one tall with straight dark hair, one tall with locks, one small in the middle with a yellow hair clip. Above them, in careful, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Families don't have to start together to stay together." Below that, in even smaller letters, "I don't think you did anything wrong. I just miss you." Min-Jun sat on the porch steps of his cousin's house for a very long time. The drawing was in his hands. The morning was very quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. He was crying before he understood he had started. He went back to the bakery. Grace saw him come in and stopped what she was doing. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with an expression that had stopped defending itself. "I don't want to take anything away from you," he said. "I don't want to walk in here and disrupt what you've built. I don't want a legal battle or a custody arrangement or anything that makes this into a war." He steadied himself. "I just want to know her. I just want a chance to be something to her, whatever that looks like, whatever pace makes sense. His voice cracked. "I don't want to lose 8 more years." Grace looked at him for a long time. "She's been asking about you every single day," she said finally. "Every single day since you stopped coming." From upstairs came the thunder of small feet on wooden stairs. And then Amara appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, school backpack half on, yellow hair clipped slightly crooked, eyes wide. She looked at Min-Jun, then at her mother, then back at Min-Jun. "Are you staying?" she asked. He crouched down to her level. "Yeah," he said. "I'm staying." She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and hugged him with the complete, uncalculated confidence of a child who has decided something and sees no reason to be uncertain about it. Min-Jun held on. He held on the way you hold something you almost lost before you knew you had it. The months that followed were not simple, nothing that real ever is. Min-Jun extended his stay. Then he extended it again. Then he started looking at apartments in Cedarville, a thing he could not have imagined doing when he arrived for what was supposed to be a 3-day wedding. He went to school events. He learned Amara's teacher's names and her best friend's name and her strong opinions about which kind of cinnamon roll was superior. He taught her to fold paper cranes, and she taught him to pipe frosting roses with a precision that humiliated him completely. He showed her photographs of his childhood in Seoul, and she told him she wanted to go there someday and design a building that people would actually look at. He and Grace learned to exist in the same space without the weight of the secret between them. It was slow and sometimes awkward, and occasionally very funny. Grace was sharp and principled and refused to be grateful for things she didn't ask for, which Min-Jun respected enormously. His mother called once a week. He answered sometimes. Healing, he was learning, was not a destination. It was something you kept choosing, and then the wedding payoff finally arrived, not Daniel's wedding, which had already come and gone, but a small ceremony a year later, a vow renewal for neighbors 2 streets over that the whole community attended. Grace brought the cake. Amara wore a yellow dress that matched her hair clip. Min-Jun sat between them and felt something settle in him that he hadn't known was unsettled. An older woman leaned across the aisle toward her husband and nodded in their direction. "That little girl looks exactly like him," she whispered, not quietly enough. Amara heard. She turned her head toward Min-Jun with an expression he had come to know well, the slow, certain smile, the dimples, the chin lifted just so. She reached over and took his hand. Then she looked at the woman and said very calmly, "No." A pause. "He's my dad." The word landed differently than Min-Jun expected. He had thought it might undo him. He had thought he might need a moment to collect himself. Instead, he simply kneeled beside her chair and looked at her, really looked at her. At those eyes he had recognized in a bakery on a random morning, at those dimples, at that absolutely unshakable certainty she carried like it was the most natural thing in the world. And he said, "And you are the best surprise I ever received." Room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true has been said out loud. The photographer, who had been pointing his camera at the wedding couple, slowly turned it toward them instead. Some things in life do not arrive on schedule. Some do not arrive the way you planned, or the way you imagined, or the way you thought you deserved. Some arrive through errors and secrets and 15 years of distance, and a tray of pastries hitting a bakery floor on an ordinary morning. But they arrive. And what you do with them, the grace you choose, the anger you release, the table you pull up a chair to, that is the whole story. That is always the whole story. If this moved you, please subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to be human, and drop a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest. See you in the next one.